This may be a prison, but it was designed to feel like a palace, and that single contradiction is what makes La Catedral one of the strangest crime scenes in modern history. Up on a jungle mountainside outside Medellín, Colombia, built a facility meant to contain Pablo Escobar. Yet the world kept hearing whispers of a private nightclub, a casino hall, luxury suites, and a place where enemies entered and never returned. The government tried to keep the details buried not because the prison was secure, but because the truth would expose something far more damaging. That the most wanted man on the planet had negotiated a prison so comfortable it looked like victory. And when you understand what happened inside La Catedral, you realize it was never really a prison at all. It was a fortress disguised as surrender. And for a time it let Escobar keep running his empire, while the world watched from a distance, assuming he'd finally been stopped. Picture a morning inside the compound, late morning light spilling across tiled floors and polished wood, while Escobar lies in bed planning his day as if he is in a private estate rather than a penitentiary. His room is fitted with a king-size bed, expensive linens, curated art, fine furniture, and shelves lined like a personal library, with religious imagery placed not as a symbol of humility, but as part of the set dressing of power. This room doubles as an office, because Escobar didn't stop being a boss when the doors closed behind him. He simply moved the headquarters to higher ground. Even here, he maintained routines that reinforced control, grooming, obsessing over appearances, weighing himself, and projecting an image of discipline because to Escobar, image was not vanity, it was strategy, and strategy was survival. Outside his suite, the layout told the real story that this was a compound built around an inner circle, not a prisoner. The rooms of trusted lieutenants were furnished with a comfort most inmates could not imagine, and the walls carried reminders of hierarchy, portraits, symbols, and the quiet message that Escobar's authority remained absolute. It becomes easier to understand why Colombia tried to keep the inside of La Catedral hidden, because once the public saw it, the narrative would collapse. This wasn't the state locking down a criminal, it was the state allowing a criminal to lock himself away on his own terms. Surrounded by loyal men in a location he knew better than anyone with an escape route in every direction. At the center of daily life was a massive hall, often described like a casino and leisure space. A room designed for social dominance as much as recreation, where meetings could look like parties and parties could hide decisions that changed lives. Escobar ate with allies, not alone, because isolation breeds weakness, and he refused to ever appear weak. A private chef prepared full meals as if the compound were a high-end restaurant, and the facility was stocked to support comfort at scale, with equipment storage and staff functioning like a private operation rather than a government-controlled prison. And while he lived miles from civilization, the logistics of luxury kept working, because money and fear are powerful supply chains, and Escobar had an endless reserve of both. But the most unsettling detail was how ordinary it could feel at first glance. A routine day, breakfast, meetings, laughter, until you remember who this man was and what he represented. By the late 70s and 80s, Medellín had become the beating heart of the global cocaine trade, and Escobar helped transform that trade into a machine by unifying factions, consolidating routes, buying protection, and eliminating rivals. The cartel's wealth was almost impossible to comprehend, but it was built on terror, assassinations, bombings, and the constant threat that anyone could become an example. Escobar's empire made him powerful, but it also made him hunted by the Colombian state, by foreign governments, and by enemies created through violence and betrayal. And that pressure forged a paranoia so intense that he began to see threats everywhere, even among his own people. La Catedral was placed strategically, not just for the view but for control. Escobar could monitor the road, watch the terrain, and anticipate approaches, and he even positioned his family nearby so visits were easier and information flowed without friction. There are accounts of him using a telescope pointed down the mountain toward a house where his wife and children stayed, creating the eerie image of a kingpin watching his domestic life through glass while commanding a criminal war beyond the walls. The compound even included details that felt surreal in context, like a child's dollhouse near his quarters, an innocent object, sitting within the same perimeter where darker decisions could be made a symbol of how Escobar blurred every boundary between family power and brutality. Then there is the part of the story that explains why luxury and secrecy mattered so much. Because inside La Catedral, comfort did not replace violence, it simply gave it a quieter stage. Escobar's office looked like a five-star suite, with marble, leather couches, heavy drapes, and careful design, but the conversations held there could be lethal. His leadership depended on a simple principle: Loyalty is not requested, it is enforced. And the higher you rose in his world, the more dangerous it became to disappoint him. When money moved through his system, he expected obedience, and when he suspected disobedience, he treated it as betrayal. One day, that paranoia focused on a man named Fernando Galeno, a figure tied to the cartel's finances and inner network. Escobar demanded regular payments, a weekly tribute that functioned like a tax of fear, and when he believed he wasn't getting what he was owed, rage took over. Phone calls turned into arguments, arguments turned into threats, and threats turned into orders. Galeno was summoned to the prison, and in Escobar's world, being summoned was rarely a negotiation, it was a verdict delivered in advance. What makes this moment even more chilling is what happened around it, because that same compound could host celebrity visits, private matches, and nights of spectacle, all while darker business waited in the shadows. There are accounts of famous footballers visiting La Catedral, including Diego Maradona, invited to play on private pitches behind the prison. Fields lit so brightly that people miles away could tell when a match was happening. Imagine the optics, the most wanted trafficker alive hosting a star athlete in a place supposedly designed to punish him, and you begin to see why the government wanted the details hidden. Every visit, every party, every display of leisure made the state look weaker and Escobar look untouchable. After games and celebrations, the inner circle would gather in the grand hall where laughter and conversation filled the space. Drinks flowed, music played, and guests moved as if they were in a private club rather than a correctional facility. In that environment, Escobar could play two roles at once: charming host and ruthless commander, and the danger was that both roles were real. People around him understood that his mood could shift without warning and that a night that started with jokes could end with someone disappearing. Because within the same compound was a secluded area described by many as a punishment room, a place stripped of luxury cold in contrast where fear replaced music. As the festivities continued, another arrival changed the atmosphere, the kind that doesn't announce itself with excitement but with silence. Escobar's face hardened, the performance ended, and he left the hall with trusted men, walking away from the noise toward the part of La Catedral that rarely appeared in stories told publicly. Inside, Galeno waited, and whatever words were exchanged, the outcome was never really in doubt. Accounts differ on exact details, but the pattern of Escobar's rule was consistent. Those who crossed him were dealt with swiftly and decisively, and the compound's isolation made consequences easy to conceal. The night would continue for others, but for one man, La Catedral became a final destination. This is the core truth of the luxury prison, that it was not built to rehabilitate or restrain Escobar. It was built to protect him, to keep him comfortable, to keep him informed, and to keep him in command. Colombia presented his imprisonment as a victory in the war on drugs, a symbol of strict control. But the reality was fragile and humiliating. A powerful criminal had negotiated the conditions of his captivity and used them to maintain influence. The secrecy was not just about preventing public outrage. It was about preserving the illusion that the state was winning. Because once the illusion cracked, Escobar's enemies inside and outside Colombia would smell weakness. And weakness was something Escobar could not tolerate. Not in the cartel, not in the government, not even in the deal that created La Catedral. Every day he stayed alive, the target on his back grew larger. And every act of violence inside the compound added pressure from authorities who could no longer pretend the arrangement was sustainable. Eventually, the government pushed to transfer him to a more secure facility, and that single move exposed what La Catedral truly was, a place with holes in its security because security was never the priority. When the transfer became real, Escobar did what he had always prepared for: he escaped, slipping away from the very prison that had been built to keep him safe, serving only a fraction of the sentence he had agreed to. For a time after the escape, he became a hunted ghost again, moving between safe houses, relying on networks that were shrinking as pressure intensified. A special police unit eventually tracked him down, and after a pursuit that ended in a rooftop confrontation, Pablo Escobar was killed at 44 years old. A man who had reshaped an entire country's relationship with violence, corruption, and power, brought to an end not by a courtroom, but by a final chase. La Catedral did not survive him for long. With Escobar gone, the compound's myth turned into a magnet. Stories of hidden money and secret tunnels drew people up the mountain, and looting dismantled what was left, piece by piece, until the structure faded into the landscape as if it had never existed. Later, the site was transformed into a place meant for peace and care, a monastery and home for the elderly, a symbolic attempt to overwrite a dark legacy with something gentler. But history doesn't erase so easily, and the ground where a luxury prison once stood still carries the memory of a nation forced to bargain with a man it could not fully control. If you've heard different accounts about what La Catedral really was, and what happened inside it, drop your take in the comments, because the most important question is still open for debate. Was this prison a necessary compromise to stop a war, or proof that Escobar had already won long before he ever escaped?